Okay. A little bit today, playing mixed it up a little bit today, playing some Latin music. I went looking, just so you know, I went looking for Spanish versions of what's going on, but I've played them in the past. I played them in the past. Today I thought I'd mix it up and play a little something from an album called Americanos, which is a compilation of music from artists, Latinx artists in the United States. I usually used to play it during Latin or Hispanic Heritage events at the college. So that's a little something. And we'll close with a little something different as well. But this is all to celebrate my guest today, Dr. Joy Sanchez-Taylor, who's an associate professor of English here at LaGuardia and is also the co-chair of the Latinx Heritage Committee. Did I get that right? The nomenclature gets all mixed up here because I'm involved in Latin American studies, which is a whole other thing, a grant on that. But this focuses on Latinx. But before we get into all that, I want to give you a little chance to talk about yourself. You want to talk a little bit about your background, Joy, and where you come from, your studies, things like that.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me on, Hugo or Dr. Fernandez.
I'm a master. I don't have a PhD. I have an MFA, which is terminal for me.
Oh, that still makes you a doctor in my book.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, you can get a DFA. And I jokingly say, am I going to be like, I'll become a shaman where I heal people with my art. But I'm not prepared to put myself through that.
No, don't if you don't have to.
That's right.
But yeah, I actually, funny enough, I'm not a native New Yorker, but my parents are. So my mom and dad are born and raised Nuyorican. They, when my dad was 18, he joined the military, and they spent the next, 30 some odd years living anywhere but New York. Right. So I grew up all over the world and then finally settled in Florida. So 6 years ago, I graduated with my PhD in American literature from the University of South Florida. And I was immediately offered the job up here at LaGuardia.
Joy, hold on one second. This is something that we missed in the pre-show check-in. What's the chance you have like a headphone set up or anything like that? Because I'm getting reverberation, feedback from your speaker.
I can hear that.
Oh, you do have a headphone set up.
I do have the headphone set on. So it was working just before. I don't know why it suddenly has this.
I don't know if it's me. Oh, you know what? Maybe let me check something here. No, I've got that off. I've got that muted.
Turn my volume down?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I apologize. So you were saying you went to USF and then you applied for the position here in the English department?
Yeah, and I got hired, and I was thrilled to come work up in New York and sort of take it full circle.
Yeah. I'm still getting the feedback, and I don't know if our tech, Chris Pope, or our ghost in the machine, Dr. Riccio, who's observing Twitch.
Here, do you want me to try out the headphones? Does that sound better?
Keep speaking.
Is there still a feedback?
No.
Oh, good. Okay, so I'll just take the headphones off then.
Let's try it this way for a little bit. We should have caught this in the pre. I think we're a little off today since it's such an early morning show. So
yeah, I'm trying to make you guys come on so early.
So you came back. Are your parents still living outside of New York City?
They do. They live in Tampa, and I go visit them frequently. But it's really funny because all of the stories I heard in my childhood now make sense. Yeah. If you don't live in New York, there are some things that are really specific to New York that you don't understand until you live in New York.
Yeah, I had that experience when I went to Cuba, and then I was hearing all of the. You know what? Now I'm thinking it's me, because I only hear it when I talk now. Uh-oh. We'll keep going. We're going to press through. So you come to LaGuardia, and what was that experience like? I mean, the English department, all that. You guys are huge.
Oh, yeah. It's a huge department, but very supportive. I was super lucky. I got paired up with Dr. Jimenez over in the English department, and She mentored me the first year. It was really a fantastic experience to come into a department that's so inviting and welcoming and family friendly. This is not the case, at other schools. I've heard stories, and I've been here 6 years. I had my daughter while I was working here on the tenure track, uh, and it's been a wonderful experience. I have absolutely no regrets about taking the job here. It's definitely the best job I ever could have gotten.
What's unique about the English department is you folks have one of the only structured mentorship programs, like being Dr. Gallardo, right?
Yes.
Jimena, who is an amazing. I think of all the people you could have been paired with, how amazing is she with all the work that she's done.
Well,
But
it's interesting because we got paired because of our research interests, which you would think, at first I was like, oh, they paired me with a Latina, obviously, because they want us to connect. But it turns out we actually had overlapping research interests in a very odd field for Latinx studies, science fiction.
Oh, right. Yes.
So my research is actually in science fiction and fantasy by authors of color.
Nice.
And so we bonded over a shared love of Octavia Butler's work. I actually came in and guest spoke at one of her classes one time about Octavia Butler because I do research on her. And I've got a book coming out next fall, actually, Diverse Futures, Science Fiction and Authors of Color. So yeah, a lot of people say, well, you're the head of the Latinx Heritage Committee, like, how is this Latinx studies? But science fiction is becoming a huge area of study for Latinx scholars.
I was going to ask your focus, Miss Butler. What kind of work does she write? What is it? What's the premise of some of the writings?
Oh, Octavia Butler is a genius, and she won a MacArthur Genius Grant.
So it's official.
Genius Grant. She's huge. And right now, people are reading her work more than ever because, she writes science fiction. She's got a couple of trilogies that are sort of set in a dystopic future. One of which looks very much like the one we're in right now.
Oh, really?
So people are finding her work to be even more relevant than ever. And since we're talking about Latinx, I want people to know that there are some brilliant new Latinx anthologies for science fiction.
Right.
I had the editor of one of those, Latinx Rising, to campus a couple of years ago to do a talk. And he's got a Kickstarter on right now, Matthew David Goodwin, for a new anthology for young adult fiction called, I think it's, Latinx Science Fiction for Dreamers, I think is the title.
Right.
So yeah, it's amazing the work people are doing connecting the experience of feeling alienated to actual aliens. It's a really fun area of study.
Let's since we're already using the phrase a lot, so let's define Latinx for folks who may not, who don't know what we're talking about. If you were to explain what qualifies somebody to be Latinx, what would your definition be?
Oh, it's a tough one. I teach Latino literature here on campus, and that title is still Latina/O literature. So
for the gender issue, which we deal with in Spanish, that typically all the nouns, right? They're all gender.
Right. We've gone through multiple
suffixes.
iterations. It was Hispanic in the 80s. It was Latino in the 90s. Now people are trying, different versions of Latino, Latinx, trying to find one that's the most inclusive. Really, I use the term Latinx because I want to be as inclusive as possible, not only for different gender identities, but for all peoples who identify, come from a Brazilian speaking or Spanish speaking background. That's how I describe it to my students. If you come to America from a culture that is Brazilian speaking, Portuguese speaking. Why am I saying Brazilian? Portuguese speaking or Spanish speaking, and you have that in your heritage, in your background, and you've come to the United States, I consider you to be Latinx.
So you don't use the defining line that you're basically somebody who is born in the United States?
No, I think you can also I think you can immigrate to the US and still identify as Latinx. The thing is, one of the barriers that we have at LaGuardia is that people, they don't know the term. They don't feel like they identify as Latinx. They feel like they identify, depending on how recently, they've come to the country, they either identify with their whole, their country of origin, or they identify, as, Colombian American rather than, Latinx. And I tell people all the time, it's not so much that I care that you use the term. The thing is that the term, we need a term, whether you're Latin American or Latino Caribbean or from Spain, we need a term for people from Portuguese and Spanish speaking backgrounds that will allow people to come together for resources, for social change, for political pressure. Because one of the issues with Latinx cultures here in this country is that we tend to fragment ourselves, and then the current administration is trying to fragment us even more by reaching out to some Latinx groups while denigrating others. And I tell my students, the reality is a racist can't tell the difference between one Latinx person and another.
Right.
Something that affects one Latinx group is eventually going to affect us all. And so we need a term to come together under to affect social change sometimes.
Yeah, I've had a lot of experience with this, being Cuban American coming from Miami, where a very powerful bloc voting, financial, and experiencing that. And, obviously the Cubans are, they help fragment because they tend to be Republican, which stems from their history with Democratic administrations, particularly the Kennedy administration. But I remember traveling to, for example, California, and I met an African-American man, and we were just talking about racism, and he looked at me and I said, these people, look at you and, you're below me in a sense, as far as the racism scale, and when you look at American history and what happened to Mexicans before they became Mexican Americans when California was taken over and these things, and how the property was taken away from them, they were made second-class citizens, along with the indigenous folks. You can see why. I mean that it's like that. I mean the kind of crimes that were committed against these people, and then of course moving to New York.
That all Latinx people have just come here.
Yeah, right. Well,
right.
Exactly. As far as
a lot of us have been here for generations and generations.
Well, you call anything that was taken during the Mexican-American War, which a lot of people thought of as an evil war, even then, as the Aztlan. This kind of conquered country that we still living under a foreign power, and when you say that, you're talking about California, Colorado, a lot of these areas. We won't even get into Texas, but coming to New York. Again, that experience of once again having left Miami, where I felt almost like I was part of the majority and didn't really see a big difference between myself, as far as the way I was treated in the Anglo community, which is what we call white people down there, right? And then coming to New York and noticing there is definitely a difference,
Yeah,
and like I joke.
I actually did my master's at the University of Miami, so I lived down
really?
there myself for 2 years. And it's not so much for me, I didn't feel the cultural divide so much with other Latinx people there. It was the racial divide that was the most stark, that the Latinx people who were darker skinned tended to work most of the menial jobs at the college.
Right.
And you could really feel that racial divide in a way that, I mean, it's a little bit in New York, but not nearly that hard of a line.
Well, the Cubans Lie, when I was growing up, they used to try to say like, oh, there was no racism in Cuba, and and that you didn't feel the racism within the Latin community, you felt it outside of it though. And I don't know I haven't lived there in 30 years, so I can't speak to what's happened since.
Right.
But yeah, there's a lot of racism.
Yeah, colorism in particular.
History.
Yeah, I talk about colorism all the time in my Latino literature course. Just because we've found, I love Latinx culture. It took me a while to get there because I'm third gen. I don't speak Spanish fluently. So it took me a while to sort of claim my identity as a Latina growing up.
Right.
There's so many beautiful things about, the different Latinx cultures. But I think sometimes in an effort for us all to feel like we're not homogenized, because in the 80s with the use of Hispanic, everybody got homogenized.
Right.
So, the students at LaGuardia, they don't want to feel like we're umbrella terming them, and I get that. They want to celebrate their individual ethnicities, but at the same time, I point out to them we do have connections. Food, culture, music. We've got these beautiful connections between different Latinx cultures, and we should be celebrating that and holding each other up rather than letting small differences divide us so that the current administration can ignore us. I mean, neither one of the candidates has, Joe Biden just went to Miami.
Right.
But is he really courting the Latinx vote? I'm not even sure he's that concerned about it.
Well, it's interesting because I caught the tail end of it. I didn't know what was going on. And I saw there was a Cuban American guy who asked some sort of question about the messages. It focused on the fact that, he was being accused of communism by the Trumps. And, he quickly brought up the fact that he was the middle of the road guy on the Democratic side. And I think he was referring to Bernie as the socialist, the true socialist. But
I mean, in the past, they would come out, they would spend more time in the Latinx communities. They would at least attempt. They would at least make an external attempt to use some Spanish words or eat some food. Right. Like this election, I feel like the Latinx vote is almost like non-existent in their campaigning, which to me tells me they're not that concerned. Like they're more concerned about other ethnic groups in this country than they are Latinx.
Well, the Democrats lost the African American vote when Hillary ran, so that's the vote they've been courting.
Yeah, they're doing more campaigning there than they're doing in our communities.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I can't remember who it was that was running for office, whether it was Clinton or who it was. It was some and a Cuban guy was just saying, like, come to here, lie to us. But don't ignore us.
Acknowledge, yeah.
Don't ignore us. And that's why they lost there.
Yeah, we're getting no acknowledgement whatsoever, which tells me that we're not coming together and putting enough political pressure on these candidates to show them that we have the numbers in this country. If everybody who could be categorized as Latinx would come together and put that kind of political pressure. Not that we all have to have the same views, but there are certain basic needs that all of our communities have that we could be asking for. And even at LaGuardia, we're talking country specific, but I'll get LaGuardia specific. If our students who could be categorized as Latinx, which is 49% of the student population at LaGuardia, if they would come together and ask for things that they wanted, they could get those things. They have the numbers.
Right. If they voted as a block.
If they came together as a group and approached our new president Adams and the current administration at LaGuardia, our voices would be heard a lot more than they're currently being heard.
What do you think that Latinx students need to ask for in particular? Do you have anything off the top of your head?
Oh, yeah. I mean, not that I want to put my wish list on the students, but when I talk to the students, I think they want two main things. They want to be recognized, and not just as Latinx, they want their specific cultures to be recognized. So we need to do events that address, cover Latinx cultures, which I am more than willing to do. So they want to be celebrated. They want the school to show that they recognize and support and celebrate those students. They also want the opportunity to learn more about their culture, because not all of our students, a lot of our students are first or second gen, but several, a good portion of the students are also like me, third gen. Don't speak Spanish fluently, have lived in New York their whole life, but have never actually read a novel by a Latinx author. I teach Latinx literature, and a good portion of my students have never read a full novel by a Latinx author. So they want the opportunity to study further, and we need to be supporting the programs that will allow them to do that. We need to support Latin American studies, which is, again, when I say Latinx and for the Latinx Heritage Committee, I'm including Latin American. I know that's unorthodox and people say, no, they're two separate things, but Latin American studies at LaGuardia is very important. And we need sister studies. We need Latin American studies, and then we need an ethnic studies option, which the English department is exploring.
Well, and also that Mellon Foundation grant that CUNY got, $10 million, is supposed to go towards that. I know that I'm participating in an Africana Studies workshop that Jason Hendrickson is putting together, coming up in the spring through the Center for Teaching and Learning. And it's supposed to focus on both ethnic and African American studies as a piece. So we'll see if that, what comes of that. Let's talk about the committee, because we've talked a lot about these ideas around Latinx, but why don't you talk a little bit about the committee and its composition, the folks on it. I mean, I actually had Rebecca Talley, Professor Rebecca Talley, Dr. Talley from my Latin American Studies grant, who's a co-chair with you on the show last week. Yeah, who was on the show last week. Yeah, she's my co-director. She's your co-chair. And I invited her to be on this, but she felt, you would do just fine right on your own.
I'm sure.
She has radio whatever fatigue.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about the committee and the folks that are on it.
Sure. I mean, I'm still learning about the entire history of LaGuardia.
Right.
LaGuardia has a long history. From what I understand, there used to be a more active, Latinx presence on campus through events and not just Hispanic heritage, but through conferences and major research initiatives. But when I got to LaGuardia in 2014, some of that had fallen by the wayside. They had a large conference, but it didn't have as good of a turnout as they had hoped for. And so there was a little bit of fatigue in the English department over Latinx events. They weren't feeling supported. And so they needed to find something that they could do that was more campus specific to reach out to our students and to other faculty on campus and start building a network, a community, rebuilding that community that we once had at LaGuardia of people who do Latinx studies or who have interest in Latinx events and studies, so that those people could come together. So in 2014 and 2015, I co-led the Latinx Symposium, which is an annual event at LaGuardia run through the English department. That allowed me to meet most of the faculty on campus and staff who had an interest in Latinx events. So in 2016, I came up with the idea, hey, what if we had a college-wide committee of faculty and staff that are interested in co-organizing Hispanic heritage events and thinking up Latin American and Latinx initiatives that we could have on campus to reach out to our students. So right now the committee has, I think it's faculty and staff from 6 different departments and 2 different academic offices on campus. And we're always looking for new members. So, you don't have to be Latinx to support Latinx initiatives. If you're interested, get in touch with me and get on the committee, because, one of the issues that's come up this year is fatigue. Most of the members of the committee, you, myself included, wear multiple hats. We're dealing with fires all over the place right now, financially, academically, and so, when I had people inquiring to me, where are the Hispanic Heritage events this year?
Which
I think doesn't
James Balnave play a part in this too, though?
Yes, campus life has been a huge support. One thing that I want people to understand, that I think a lot of the faculty and staff that aren't on the committee, I don't think they understand this. If you're not on a heritage committee, that we don't get a dedicated line of funding.
Right.
We don't have our own money. So we have to go to different grants and different academic offices on campus to get money to have Hispanic heritage events. The problem is, this year with the budget, that money is coming in very, very slowly.
Right. It's 9:29. I'm going to take this opportunity to just do a quick station break. And I'm realizing now I failed to introduce myself at the beginning of the show. You're watching LaGuardia Web Radio, WLGR. I'm your host for the show. The show is What's Going On. My name is Hugo Fernandez. And my guest today is Dr. Joyce Sanchez-Taylor, Associate Professor in the English Department and the co-director or co-chair of the Latinx Heritage Committee. Getting that right. So I can speak to that fatigue right now that you touched on, which is, I'll be honest, I worked hard to make tenure and full professor. And then when, and Dr. Will Fulton, who has been a partner of crime of mine for some events during Hispanic Heritage for the last few years, came to me and we talked about, he wanted to apply for funding. I'll support you, but you're going to have to write it and you're going to have to deal with the committee, because my experience had been, first of all, writing it is not the big deal, but getting it is tough. I feel a lot of times the committees that are in charge of funds are looking for excuses to not give you the money rather than seeing the benefit that could be garnered from the event. That's number one. Number two, they ask for a lot afterwards. They don't make it easy to spend the money. Right. And then you've got to go find students. You got to get, asses in the seats, as I say. And that might be the academic term, but it's, and it's exhausting. And,
it's a lot of work.
Yeah. And I said it to Mello at the time. When she asked, why do, senior faculty, once they've achieved tenure in full, why do they seem to kind of melt away from these activities? And I said, it's, gatekeepers make it too difficult to do our job. I mean, half the battle is getting the money, the other half is spending it. And, and then the student. So.
And the entire process takes months and months of paperwork and setup.
Yeah.
And, and it's very difficult right now. I feel like campus life is doing everything that they possibly can to make sure that Hispanic heritage happens. And I do want to thank James Selnov and Shayla Pruitt there for their work. But the money's coming in slowly, which means that even the event that I have scheduled for November, I made sure to schedule my event for November thinking that, even though it's not in the Hispanic Heritage Month window, one of the issues we have is our quarter system, which means that Hispanic Heritage events pretty much have to happen as soon as the semester starts to be counted. But this year I told people we're going to have to be very flexible with that, because the money's coming in so slowly. I'm still having trouble getting the resources that I need for the event that I'm having in November.
Right.
And events for October have had to be put on hold because they can't get the funding in.
Right. And yeah, we don't even get a full, like an official month. We're somewhere in the middle of September
Right.
and October.
Yeah,
I mean, I know that
September
African
15th
American,
to October 15th, really. Yeah.
you know, and I shouldn't complain. I mean, African History Month, people complain it's the shortest month of the year, and I think that Salnav had talked about extending that experience. Like, why does it have to be? Let's celebrate African
No,
American
we
history,
should.
African American history all the time or across
Absolutely.
periods. I feel the same way about Hispanic heritage.
No,
That
and we
it's like
absolutely do that. I want people
continuing.
to know that the symposium is always in the spring for that reason,
Right,
because we don't want all the Hispanic heritage events to happen in, a 1-month window.
right,
Certainly not. But at the same time, I certainly don't want people on campus to feel like we don't honor Hispanic Heritage Month. So we always try to make sure we have a few. I mean, last year we did one of the largest events we've had in the past couple of years at LaGuardia. We did two events that had multiple events. So two
right.
series of events on campus. It was great. It was a super large presence on campus. In that time period, we had multiple Latinx authors. We had multiple former Young Lords members come out, and we really celebrated last year. But that took an extraordinary amount of work. It took two separate committees writing co-curricular grants, getting classes to sign on. So six to eight people total to make that happen. And this year, we're finding that we don't have it.
The
So
money
many
or the
people, the money or the people, because so many people that are on the committee are also helping out at nonprofits or running nonprofits. They're
right.
also doing the Latin American Studies, grant that you were talking about that you guys are working on.
Well,
So there's
ours is finished. It's everything's over, but I forget what that phrase is, but the cheering or whatever it is. Uh, Though interestingly enough, we are sitting on a slight surplus. That's what the meeting is this morning. So we're sitting on a slight surplus, and we may be looking at doing, because the conferences typically call for food and all these other kinds of things. And I better check, because the NEH is not a lot, doesn't pay necessarily for conferences, but we have enough money to invite maybe 2 or 3 more speakers, and we could do an online conference of sorts where people check in, and listen to 3 different people. And we've had great folks come and speak, but it's really just the co-directors now trying to dealing with articulation agreements and dealing with reporting. But we'll figure out what we're going to do with this last bit of funding.
Right. So yeah,
Right.
that was one of my goals when I started the Latinx Heritage Committee, was to make sure that Latinx, all Latinx studies, Latin American, Latino studies, all the events and all the initiatives happening on campus, we're speaking to each other,
Right.
because we all need to know what we're doing. If there's plans like that, then the rest of the committee gets to know about it. We get to support it. We get to advertise it, and that's another thing that's really important about the committee, is that we coordinate then, because in the past, yeah, everybody was doing their own events. They weren't being advertised outside of the department. And so, but, if ELA was having an event, English didn't know about it sometimes. So
Right.
committee is really helping that cross communication that really needs to happen.
You're doing probably the hardest work I think of at the college, which is interdepartmental communication. I mean, obviously,
Wrangling a sack of cats.
exactly. Interdivisional is probably the toughest, but strangely enough, interdepartmental is tough too. I know that I have other initiatives where I've been reaching out around. I see your Star Trek ship, the Enterprise over there, but
Yeah,
trying to
that's
reach out to.
technically my husband's. He's the
Oh, really?
Trekkie. I'm the sci-fi literature person, so most of the
Right.
books are mine.
Is that how you bonded, the 2 of you?
Yes, actually, our very first conversation was about Star Trek.
Oh,
I
really?
find that guys really like it when you know something about science fiction. So it's always been a selling point.
That's maybe you should advertise your class that way,
Yeah. No, I would love. I use science fiction texts all the time in literature classes, but it's funny the reaction you get from people when you say, we're going to read science fiction. Most of our students go, no, I hate science fiction. Because what they're picturing is the spaceships and aliens and sort of like the classic sci-fi tropes, when really the authors that are working in sci-fi right now, authors of color, are doing some really amazing things with themes of colonization, alienation, in science fiction stories. And so when they actually read the stories I assign them, Octavia Butler is a huge pick for me, but also, so many other authors that are doing great work. They read the stories and they go, wait a minute, this is my story.
Right.
This is a story of immigration. This is not a science fiction story.
They're basically just transposing a lot of the things that happen here to the future locations, right?
Yeah, if you think about it, the experience of feeling alienated happens in science fiction all the time, right? You get dropped into a new world.
Right.
That's exactly the same experience as, immigrating from one country to another a lot of times.
Very much so. So look, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about, so what is happening this semester with Latinx? I mean, you talked about your event. You want to talk a little bit about that event?
Sure. Uh, the event that I'm doing is an author talk with author Riccio. He is a wonderful and generous person. The only reason I was able to schedule this event in advance was because he offered to come for free. We are going to find him some money, but he did offer to come and speak to our students for free because he feels so strongly just about connecting with students and sharing his expertise, which, I can't thank him enough for.
What's his expertise? Tell us about it.
Yeah, he is a genre writer. So this is one of the other things I love about bringing him is, a lot of times when you bring Latinx authors, you bring, we had Angie Cruz come on, we've had some very well-known Latinx authors who write, memoir and historical fiction, but nobody really thinks of Latinx literature in terms of genre literature. So he writes detective novels and science fiction. And I enjoy teaching his work immensely because he talks about, themes that we can all connect to: gentrification of New York City, alienation. He's got some science fiction stories about immigration. So we had him out on a panel a couple years ago when I promoted Latinx Rising, the short story anthology. It's a series of short stories that are Latinx sci-fi by some really amazing authors. But I'm having him on to talk about his new novel, which is a detective story. I have it here, Hipster Death Rattle.
Good promotion.
It's a great name.
I like the goatee and the coffee. Does that mean this is going to be about a hipster doofus?
It is actually about a serial killer.
Nice.
Who targets hipsters in Brooklyn.
It's about time.
So yeah, it really, the premise is very wild as most detective stories are, but the story itself is, it's set in Brooklyn, it's set in New York, it's set in places our students they know that they can relate to a lot of times. And it really is addressing sort of the encroaching of gentrification and how that's changing our Latinx communities in Brooklyn and, even the Lower East Side. I almost don't even recognize it anymore.
So I was going to say this is like trying to sublimate this anger towards the gentrification in the sense of being run out of their neighborhoods.
It also really takes into account, is gentrification something that's inevitable? It's a question that it asks.
Right.
Because, obviously those communities before they were Latinx, they had other communities living there. So is this bound to happen? Is this, is that what's going to happen? Or should we be resisting with community, should we be building community resistance to that?
It's the great question. And if you study the history of New York City, that's what it's all about.
It generally happens. Yeah, every couple of generations, there's a shift. But at the same time, if you look at what they're doing in Chinatown right now in New York, a revitalization, putting money into Latinx communities could really help to keep, uh, you know, that
Loisaida.
culture alive.
Yeah.
How can we lose the Nuyorican Poets Cafe? If
Right.
we were to lose that, we'd be losing a cultural institution of New York. So New Yorkers need to realize that Latinx culture is inherently part of New York now, and we need to work to preserve it the way that people are working in Chinatown to preserve Chinatown.
Right. Yeah, good stuff. By the way, we're approaching the last quarter hour.
Oh,
So
let me just say real quick that
we can talk about, no, well, I'm just going to say we can transition into talking about the future of the Latinx Committee and activities on LaGuardia. We can also open it up to questions. I don't know if there's any questions coming in on the stream that Dr. Riccio would like to forward my way through text messages, as she tends to do. So I'm just putting it out there.
Right. Well, I just want to say that the talk with Richie Narvaez is November 5th. If anybody's interested, email me if you're interested in attending. I'm going to send out the invitation only to people who tell me that they're interested for safety reasons. And Campus Life is also doing 2 other events. They've sent out a campus-wide email with a flyer for those events. So please check, support Campus Life and support this event happening November 5th.
Do we know what those events are at all, or?
I know they're doing a cooking class, Latinx cooking class, and I think the other event, I'm not going to remember it off the top of my. I think it's a talk that they're doing with the ASAP honored students. But there's a flyer. They put out a flyer.
I'd have to look for it. Yeah.
My event and the other 2 events, and people should really, save that flyer, share it with your classes, and support these 3 events that we've managed.
Yeah, I really respond to the cooking one because my favorite, probably one of the only cookbooks I have that I pay attention to it's called Memories of a Cuban Kitchen. And it's all about this woman compiling all the recipes from her life in Cuba. That I think it was she had a cook that because I guess she came from money, and who had all these recipes of things, but she always starts it with a little bit of a story about the family. And for me it just channels all these memories of my mother in the kitchen cooking, and like when I finally hipped up to the fact that, especially when I moved to graduate school and I was separated from her food, I realized I got to go back. I got to learn these recipes because I not to mention you go to restaurants and their beans are never like your mother's beans. Their rice is not like my mother's rice is.
Don't get me started about beans, because I'll fight you putting your raw onions on my beans.
yeah, I don't do that. But I know that wrapped into that is that's histories, and because she would tell stories about people in the family. I mean, her mother wouldn't let her cook, so she had to learn to cook from a cookbook as well.
Yeah.
But she got pretty good at it. So, what's the future of Latinx at LaGuardia? You want to talk about that?
Yeah.
There are no questions on the stream, by the way. Everybody's still waking up.
Yeah, it's early. I figured.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. The future of LaGuardia is that we need to become a leader amongst Hispanic serving institutions. We are an HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution. We have gotten grants in the past for being Hispanic Serving Institution, but those grants have not focused specifically on initiatives for Latinx students or initiatives to educate the LaGuardia community about Latinx heritage.
Nor have they included members of either the staff or faculty who are Hispanic in the writing of those grants, which might explain the first point.
Exactly. So the good news is that the Latinx Heritage Committee is meeting with President Adams in November to talk about these issues. And he's very interested in hearing our experience what is keeping us from achieving greatness as a Hispanic serving institution, and he wants to help. Now, keeping in mind funding pressures and issues happening on campus this year and likely in the future, I don't know exactly what form that help is going to take, but it is nice to have support from the top down. It's very necessary. If we're going to do a campus-wide initiative, and we're going to go get grant money from outside the school, we need everybody on board.
Well, you also need the signature of the provost, which usually comes, after discussions with the president for any grant application. So totally, you need support from the very top.
Yeah, I'm hoping this top-down support will allow us to do more campus-wide initiatives, not just heritage celebrations, but initiatives where we reach out to students who are interested in Latinx studies. We get ethnic studies off the ground. We get these students interested in studying in these fields, and then we articulate with other CUNY schools so that they can continue their education in Latin American studies or ethnic studies.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that is always for me, I don't know whether it's sad or of concern, is that some people feel like sometimes as we lift up the Hispanic focus, that we're like basically taking away, attention from other communities or underrepresented groups, African American studies or Asian studies, where we have, which are both large. They're not 49%, but they are also large groups within the institution. And I mean, in our work with the Latin American studies, we've found that, and we've talked about this, that there are the Asian community is mixed into the Latino community, and vice versa. Obviously a huge population of Latinos of color, Latinx folks of color. We're all mixed in. That it's not race, it's culture, and that we can all work to support each other. Like one of the greatest classes I ever took, not my major, but I took a New York Mambo. That was the name of the class, but it was basically about the African diaspora in the Western Hemisphere. And of course, it's all through it, but particularly in Latin America, and which my professor said, the thing about Latins is that we were Africanized twice, because the Moors controlled the Iberian Peninsula for a long period of time, and then of course again with the slave trade in the Western Hemisphere, and that's why it's so rich in our culture.
And it's important for all students to understand that Latin American and Latinx cultures are diverse within the culture, because there's a stereotype of Hispanic as being one thing that we get through media. But there are Afro-Latinos, there are indigenous communities within Latin communities. So I think, again, it's the same thing as the Latinx umbrella. People don't want to be brought together and homogenized. We don't want ethnic celebrations week where they force us all to have, all the heritage events in 1 week. So we don't want to be lumped all together, but we do want to work together. And I think it's really important that, the faculty that run, the Asian heritage celebrations and the, Black and African American heritage celebrations recognize that. And that, again, if we all come together and ask for what we need, we're more likely to get it.
Safety or strength in numbers. So we're moving. We have less than 10 minutes left. So I didn't know if you wanted to take an opportunity to thank any folks, either from your committee or from the college in general. You've talked about certain folks, but we're wrapping up. We're into the wrap-up phase.
Yeah, absolutely. My co-chair, Rebecca Talley, Dr. Rebecca Talley in social sciences, all of the members of the committee. There's too many. I'm not going to try to list them.
And you'll forget somebody if you try to list them, right?
I will forget somebody. Campus Life has been a big support, and I hope the Women's Center will continue to be a big support for Latinx initiatives. And I will in advance thank President Adams for agreeing to meet with us and for being open to helping us, because we really need to build up our Latinx presence on campus. And I know we're not on campus right now, so that makes it even harder. But when we come back to campus, we need to make our voices heard and make it known what we need to be a truly Hispanic serving institution.
Yeah. And I just want to thank you. I mean, we've worked together. I know that sometimes I wish we had worked closer, because, because that, again, I will admit that we get siloed in humanity sometimes trying to make these things come off, and we don't reach out to groups. So I would have liked a bigger impact with some of the events that happened in the Little Theater. But I enjoy being part of that committee, as I enjoy being part of the Latin American Studies group as well, but supporting all groups at the college. So I think that the work you're doing with this group is essential, and I don't know if it actually makes me feel more Latin in doing it, because I'm like you. I mean, I grew up speaking Spanish in the house. That was my first language, and then of course I learned English.
Yeah.
But I lost it because living in different communities where I was actually, a very slim minority, and lost that engaging in the community thing. Never studied it formally, and would love to study it formally. But it's taken years to get it back in various ways, through music, through cuisine. Now as a faculty member, trying to promote these things, and my guilty pleasure is I've been watching Narcos Mexico. And I just love watching the subtitles and the translations and saying that's not actually, but hearing the Mexican swear words. That's my fit, and figuring it out. It's been good, and they do a pretty good job of getting across the point of view of the Mexican people as far as what's been happening with, this issue of drugs in the Western Hemisphere. But anyhow, that's another show.
It's a very nuanced and
it's genre.
Yeah,
but I gotta tell you, it makes me feel more Latin. It makes me feel more Latin, believe it or not.
I definitely think all of the faculty at LaGuardia, oddly enough, the faculty who are Latinx at LaGuardia don't necessarily have the same ethnic makeup as the students.
Right.
So our faculty are more likely to be Cuban, Puerto Rican, Mexican.
Right.
Our students are more likely to come from other Latin American countries.
All over.
So.
But thank you for your work. Thank you for being on the show. I think of this as a Hispanic heritage event, this show, and
thank you to the show for promoting the events happening, and for bringing. I know you guys are bringing musical guests and other Latinx figures. And
I'm trying, but Joe Conzo we couldn't quite hook up the Skype thing. Hopefully I'll be able to do that in a couple of weeks. But if you've been watching and listening the show today, my guest is Dr. Joy Sanchez-Taylor, who from the associate professor in the English department, who is the co-chair with Rebecca Talley of the Latinx Heritage Committee, and has been doing a lot of work. We didn't even talk about the special committee with the president, but maybe we'll talk about that sometime. Have you folks on with some of your folks on that. And you've been watching what's going on here on LaGuardia Web Radio, WLGR. I've been your host, Hugo Fernandez, and we will take you out the way we came in. Mr. Pope, play us out. Thank you.